When you're ready to start sharing, you are free to start whenever you want.
Notifications pop up. So hello, everyone, and welcome. It works for me this time. Yeah.
Good morning, and thank you for attending my session. My name is Sakina Ash, and I'm a technology resource teacher for Portsmouth Public Schools. It is my hope that you'll leave this session with more resources for your technology toolbox. Thanks.
So there we go. So moving forward with blended learning, the topic of today's session. I got the inspiration from this session during the pandemic. Like most of you, our division, we faced many challenges with remote learning, but it wasn't all bad. You know, there were a lot of lessons that we learned, a lot of takeaways that we could use in order to apply and enhance student learning. So here's the outline of this session. We're going to discuss what blending learning is. I'm going to talk about some of the technologies that are used in blended learning courses. I'm going to go over 4 different blending learning examples with you all: flip, station rotation, lab rotation, and individual rotation. We're going to discuss how to plan for a blended learning course, and we're going to talk about some of the advantages and challenges. Then I'll share some resources with you all and take your questions. There we go. So education is no longer about just putting pen to paper and memorizing facts. Innovative educators today are using technology to enhance student learning, and that's evidenced by the adoption of technology-assisted teaching models, as well as blended learning models. So I know this is probably not your first time of hearing blended learning, but my question to you is, what are some words or phrases that come to mind when you hear blended learning? So if you could scan the QR code there with your phone, and you should be able to type. There we go. And the virtual participants, you should be able to participate as well. And if the QR code is too far away from you, you can also go to slido.com and enter that number. Personalization, okay. Meaningful technology integration, I like that. Flexibility. Choice. More student responsibility, and we're going to discuss that a little bit later as well. Student driven, I like that. Stress. Student centered, personalized again. Okay, so options, I like that as well. So Some of these words and phrases are spot on when it comes to describing what a blended learning environment or a blended learning classroom is. So what I'm going to do is have a little bit of a discussion about what blended learning is versus what it isn't. So blended learning courses include a mix of face-to-face, instructor-led online learning components that give students some control over the pace and path of their learning. Blended learning is so much more than just mixing technology and teaching. It is not just an online course or a lecture course that is broadcasted online, and it's not simply swapping analog tools with digital ones. A blended learning environment, those have those online and in-class elements that work together to really create a rich learning experience for the students. A blended learning classroom is not a tech-rich learning environment. In a tech-rich classroom, that's where students or teachers would use technology to complete the same task as a non-tech environment. So let's say the students are given a worksheet in one teacher's class, whereas they may fill it out with a pencil or a pen. And in a tech-rich environment, they'll just use that, complete that same worksheet, maybe on their Chromebook. Maybe the teacher scanned it, or maybe they're using Cami or some other tool to complete it. Or writing an essay. In one classroom, the students may take a pencil and a sheet of paper and write an essay, whereas in a tech-rich classroom, the students can just use Microsoft Word or some other word processing software to complete that task. So blended learning is not just a tech-rich learning environment. So I really like this definition of blended learning. So blended learning, also referred to as hybrid learning, is a method of teaching that integrates technology and digital media with traditional teacher-led classroom activities. And it allows students more control, more flexibility to customize their learning experience. So in general, blended learning refers to the learning that happens in an online format, and it counts on that face-to-face instruction. And those two learning environments are complementary, and they work together to create a truly integrated learning experience for the students. So here are some of the technologies that are used in blended learning. And we're gonna dive into a little bit more detail with these a little bit later on in the presentation. But you have your LMS, in-class response systems, adaptive learning platforms, learning analytics, video, Chromebooks, and iPads. And like I said, we're gonna discuss those a little bit more in detail later. So the first model that I'm gonna go over with you all is a flipped classroom. In an extreme flipped learning classroom, students will consume all traditional lecture material at home. And during class, that's where they'll complete that assignments that would traditionally be given as homework. They'll complete those while they're at school. And they may also work on team-based or project-based learning assignments as well. By putting the content online, students can move at their own pace. Those who are unfamiliar with the task, or those who are familiar with the task, excuse me, are able to progress faster. And those who are unfamiliar have the ability to pause, rewatch, or utilize other resources to help them really understand that concept being taught. Another benefit of this flipped classroom models is that students can engage with the content when they're most alert, whether that's early in the morning, early in the afternoon, or late at night. It's at their discretion when they choose to engage with the content. Another advantage is that students with disabilities can take the breaks that they need without fear of missing out on instruction or distracting their classmates. So question, how often have you heard students describe the frustration of understanding a topic when they're in school, but when they get home, ready to do their assignments and apply that knowledge, they're confused and completely lost? So it happens a lot. The research says that we learn best when we're doing active work and not passive listening. So when students do their work assignments during class, teachers are available to assist them when they really need it, when they're trying to apply that knowledge that they've learned. Again, blended learning is not an online course. It counts on that face-to-face interaction and that one-on-one interactions between the students and the teachers. Teachers move from a passive role as a lecturer to a more active role as a guide with the students. Generally speaking, with traditional learning formats, it's time-based, meaning students all progress at the same time, regardless of individual performance or regardless of gaps in knowledge. Once the teacher's done teaching, that's it. However, in a blended learning model, it's more mastery-based, taking into account the differences in learning levels and achievement of the students. So learning shifts from a teacher-focused model to a student-focused model, which means the teacher moves from being a sage on the stage to a guide on the side. So the next model that I want to talk about is the station rotation model. The station rotation model allows students to rotate through stations on a fixed schedule, where at least one of the stations is an online learning station. So this model is probably most common in elementary settings, because teachers are always rotating their students through stations or through centers. However, that doesn't mean that it's not useful in the middle and secondary levels. I've seen it used at all levels and be successful. So again, at least one of the stations is an online instruction station, and the teacher-led station is another one of the options in the station rotation model. So in this example here, the teacher would be working with the students in a teacher-led station. Students are working independently with online instruction. And then there are also other stations, maybe collaborative activities or other stations going on for the students to partake in. And the floating teacher, that just means an instructional assistant, paraprofessional, SPED teacher would be available to assist with those other two stations. So the next one is the lab rotation model. And the lab rotation, just like the station model, allows students to rotate through stations on a fixed schedule. However, in this case, online learning occurs in a dedicated computer lab. So this model allows for flexible scheduling arrangements with teachers and other paraprofessionals because it enables teachers to make use of existing computer labs in the school. In the school that I work at, the computer labs prior to the pandemic, they were always full, always reserved for something. Now, since we've gone one-on-one, it's a deserted land back there. No one uses the computer labs for anything. So I've encouraged those teachers in my school who have expressed an interest in the lab rotation model to make use of those labs. It's bigger than the classroom, and you can really use that on a daily basis and dedicate that time to that online learning. And the last model that I'm going to discuss with you is the individual rotation model. So the individual rotation model allows students to rotate through stations, but on their individual schedules set by the teacher. So unlike the other two rotation models that we talked about, students may not necessarily rotate through every station on the individual rotation model. Instead, they're only going to go to the ones that are on their playlist as determined by the teacher. So in my opinion, this is the model that probably takes a little bit more planning and a little bit work by the teacher, because you're using the data to determine what stations or what activities does each student really need to engage in. You may determine that, hey, you have a student or a group of students who don't need intervention or direct instruction. So their time will be spent using, doing a collaborative group project or maybe working in a central learning lab. So that's the individual rotation model. So here I have a list of resources that I put in a Padlet. And these are just some of my favorite resources that are available to facilitate a blended learning classroom. So if you want to follow with me, you can. That QR code will take you there, or you can use that bit.ly link. And I'm just going to jump right over there. It's a little blurry, but here we have it. So the first resource that I have listed on this Padlet are learning management systems. And I encourage teachers to use their LMS as sort of a hub for housing all of the resources that they will be giving to students in a whatever blended learning model they choose to implement. Whether that's putting links to other websites or other apps, or posting directions for their students. All that should be housed within your learning management system. And I just have listed some of the most popular ones. Schoology is what we use in our division, but there's also Canvas, Blackboard, D2L, Google Classroom. All of those will work for really as a central location for all of your blended learning resources. In-class response systems. And I did include this website here because I found it useful, but it has a list of 75 of the most common formative assessment tools. So these are those tools or platforms that you will use to get immediate feedback from your students to give them formative assessments. Quizzes, we've all heard of that. Socrative, Kahoot are just some of those that are listed down here.
Oh, Fareed is going to be.
All right, adaptive learning platforms. These are those websites and apps that really personalize the learning experience for students. Whereas with Kahoot or quizzes, all students are presented with those same questions that they must answer. When we go to these adaptive learning platforms, IXL, Education City, Prodigy Math, Class K-12, those learning experiences are really personalized based off of the student's individual needs. So they're not receiving just a one-size-fits-all learning opportunity. It's catered to their individual needs. Student engagement platforms, these are those websites that really get the students excited about learning. Sure, you can give the students a sticky note and tell them to write their answer to an exit ticket on a sticky note and post it on their way out the classroom. Or you can have the students record their answers using a Flipgrid or something of that nature to really get them engaged and excited about the content. But Padlet, as we're using here, Canva, Animoto, we've got Lucid Chart, Lucid Press, Flipgrid, we've got Seesaw, Kami, Quizlet, and there are just a bunch of resources there that are intended to engage the students. Lesson delivery and lesson content and delivery. These are more so these pre-loaded content or pre-created content for teachers. Nothing has to be done by the teacher except maybe linking the resource to their students, making it available for their students. WHRO, Virtual Virginia, all have those, and they sometimes these resources are aligned to the state standards, sometimes they're not, but you would just pick and choose based off of what you're teaching. Edpuzzle is another one with pre-created lessons. Nearpod, Khan Academy, Desmos, and Peerdeck are some of the other lesson delivery and lesson content platforms. So there are times when you find that, hey, this resource or this pre-recorded content doesn't have everything that I need. So you may opt to create your own lessons for your students. In the event that that is the case, you've got WeVideo and Screencastify, which are excellent tools for screen recording or video lesson recording. Back when I was in the classroom, I used to always say that all of my teaching problems could be solved if I could just clone myself. And so while I was not successful in cloning myself, I was able to utilize, I didn't have Screencastify and all these other fancy apps back then, but my Promethean board had a screen record option. And I would either come in early or stay back late and record my lessons because I had those students who really didn't need me teaching them in a one-on-one environment. I can record my lesson, put the video online, and then really spend that time engaging the students and small group arrangements, the ones who really need that assistance. And then learning analytics. So we've got all of these resources here, but how do we determine what our students really need? I am a firm believer that all instruction should be data-driven. So what data are you using to drive your instruction to ensure that the students are receiving the material that they actually need? Students in Virginia, they all completed the fall growth assessments in the fall. Maybe you can use that baseline data to determine what stations you're making available for your students. You should have access to previous year's SOL data. Our division, we used to use PowerSchool assessments and analytics, but they've since jumped over to Performance Matters. But using those platforms, the division issues the division-wide common formative assessments, and that data is useful for planning instruction. So don't forget about those learning analytics when you're planning for instruction. And finally, building support. You have your ITRTs who are always there and willing to assist you. Some days we're busy, we don't know our left from our right. Then other days we're wanting people to invite us into our classroom. Make use of your building technology support if you have an interest in doing blended learning. You also have content specialists, whether it be resource teacher or division specialist. Utilize them within the planning phases of blended learning. Classroom support, special education teachers, you have your instructional assistants or paraprofessionals. And I know in our division, we have algebra readiness tutors in most of the math classrooms who are also available to assist in the classroom. And don't forget about building administration, principals and assistant principals. Your only job isn't to handle discipline. They are instructional leaders within your schools. Pitch the idea to them. You know, maybe they'll be willing to come in and support you in some capacity. So I've talked about all of these resources, but what do you do with them? It's kind of like it's all over the place. How do I put it into a method or in a manner that I can actually use for my students? And so that's where these planning guides come into place. So I created these planning guides for my teachers, like I said, because I felt like I just presented a whole lot of resources, a lot of information, but how can I make the practical use of this? That was my driving question behind this. So within these planning guides, and as you can see, you do have access to these. I've got one catered for each blended learning model. We've got flipped, and I think I'm going to focus on the station model here. But they all have driving questions related to the blended learning method that they are interested in. So a teacher comes to me and they express, hey, I'm interested in trying a station rotation model. I'll give them a planning guide, just kind of brain dump, throw some ideas down. And then we'll get together during their planning one day and really take a look into how we can make this happen, how we can make this thought a reality. So some of the questions that are on here is the upcoming unit or topic that the teacher is interested in. We talk about how many days per week is, let's say, the station rotation model appropriate for your class. Maybe you only want to do it 1 or 2 days, or maybe it's appropriate to do it all week, just depending on what's being taught. And down here with these 4 blocks, we've got the actual stations. So these are just for the generic stations that I like to promote. One is an online learning station for independent practice. The other is a teacher-led station for real-time feedback. We have a collaborative learning station where students use their peers as partners. And then don't underestimate the power of a no-tech station for independent practice. So often the kids are on their devices, on their Chromebooks, and in front of a screen. Let's take a break from that at times. You know, I know those skills are important, but sometimes it's good to just hand them a dry erase board or concrete manipulus to work with. So going to the next stage or the next page, we talk about how many stations would your students rotate through in a single class block, whether that be 2 stations or 5 stations, just whatever is appropriate for what's being taught. How much time would be allowed for each station based on the numbers of stations that you have, the teacher has designated. How would you divide students for each station? Are you going to randomly assign them? Are you going to put students with similar skill level? Or are you going to put students with varying skill levels so that the students who have mastered the concept can help those who are struggling? And if you're not going to randomly assign your students, what data will you use to divide the students into groups? We discussed approximately how many students will be assigned to each station based off of the class roster. And will it be necessary for you to rearrange your classroom to accommodate a station rotation model? Again, when I taught and when I did station rotations in my classroom, the students would always know when it was a station day because they'd come in and I'd have the desk group in a manner that screamed, hey, it's station day. But with COVID and with these restrictions that we have, that may not always be possible. But keep that in mind if it will be necessary to rearrange your classroom to accommodate a station model. And then we discussed how your SPED teacher or instructional assistant can assist. What are some available resources that you can use for your station rotation idea? And that's really looking back at that Padlet, all that list of resources, what not learning management system, but what adaptive learning platform, what student engagement platforms will I use to really assess my students' knowledge? And then how can Ms. Ash, that's me, the TRT, support you implementing a station rotation model? Would you want your TRT to come in and record you teaching a lesson, maybe for that online learning station? Or maybe you want your TRT overseeing the collaborative learning station where the students are working on a project. And then we have an area for notes and ideas and miscellaneous things. So I'm going to pull up an example that I did complete. And this is one that was based off of a 7th grade math classroom. So the SOL that we focused on here was 7.12, where the students will solve 2-step linear equations. I decided that it's only appropriate, 2 days of station rotation activities is appropriate for this SOL. So on day 1, the students will engage in whole class instruction. Day 2, we'll do stations. Day 3 could be a whole class review. Day 4, we're doing stations again. Then on day 5, I'm assessing students for their knowledge. So this is the fun part, planning for those stations. So the online learning station for independent practice. On the first day of stations, I said that students would watch a 2-step equations video lesson, either using Khan Academy or Nearpod. They have similar resources and I would just choose which one I want students to engage in. And on that second day of online learn, or second day of stations, I would have students completing an ed puzzle lesson on solving 2-step equations, where they would actually be prompted to answer those questions as they're progressing through the video. The teacher-led station for real-time feedback. On both days, I want those students who are working with me to work on solving 2-step linear equation word problems. I've looked at the data and determined that the students always struggle when it comes to word problems. So that is really where I want to focus my attention and give that direct, that immediate feedback to those students when it comes to working with word problems. Collaborative learning station, where students work with their peers. On both days, I think the students should work with the TRT to create videos on how to solve 2-step linear equations. I think that would be a fun where the student becomes the teacher and they show, hey, well, these are the steps that you take to solve this. And then the students can present or complete a project to present to the class later on that week. And then the no-tech station for independent practice. On both days, I want the students working with concrete manipulatives to represent and solve 2-step linear equations. So I've reached out to my math specialist. I've obtained some colored chips, some algebra tiles, and some weights and a balance scales. And I want those students working in that group with nothing technology related, but solving linear equations. So with this model, with this example that I created, students will rotate through 4 stations in a single class block. I would allow about 15 minutes. That gives enough time for directions and transitions for each station. And I've decided to divide these students based on varying skill levels. I've used growth assessment data as well as related common formative assessment data to group these kids so that they can help each other. Given the roster of this particular class, approximately 5 to 6 students will be in each station. And as far as rearranging the classroom is concerned, like I said, prior to COVID, it would be easy to group the desks together. However, just keeping social distancing protocols in mind, you may need to reach out to your librarian, the library media specialist, and reserve the library for that day. That way students have all this room to work with those particular stations. The SPED teacher or the IA, I would have them overseeing the no-text station or floating. As I stated before, if the teacher is involved with the direct learning station and the TRT is assisting with the collaborative learning station, the students who are on the online learning station don't really need any assistance. Everything is there for them. So I would have, if I have assistants in my room, have them overseeing that no-text station where the students are working with the manipulators. Some available resources, I would use Chromebooks, Schoology to post all of my directions. I've learned that the more directions you give students, the less questions they ask. So I would use Schoology as, or whatever LMS that you have to really post the directions for each station there. Khan Academy Edpuzzle for my online learning station. Either WeVideo or Stop Motion as that collaborative learning station where the students are presenting or creating those videos. And then I've got Nearpod here because like I said, it has similar resources for lesson content. So how can your TRT support you in implementing the station rotation model? So I put in here on those two rotation days, on those two station rotation days, I would like for the TRT to lead the collaborative learning station. Now, whether she's coming in the classroom or pulling the students in the hall or taking them to the library, I'm putting her, my TRT, in charge of that collaborative learning station. And just some notes, some things to think about it. If you're not able to reserve the library, if you're in a classroom and if you're doing small group instruction with your students and you have a group of students here working in an online learning station and the students back here collaborating, it may tend to get a little noisy. You may want to tell the students, hey, bring your headphones on this day so that the online learning students aren't distracted by what's going on with the other groups. And then, like I said, talk to your librarian about seeing if you can reserve libraries so that you can have that extra space to work in. So that is that. I'm gonna jump back over here. And like I said, you all have access to both the plain guides as well as the examples that I shared with you. And those are all hyperlinked. So weighing it out, I think the biggest benefit of blended learning is hands down student engagement. Students love their devices always attached to their fingertips. Now we can take these devices and really transfer them around the globe and expand their knowledge. Blended learning is also valuable for blended instruction. Teachers can use those adaptive learning platforms that we talked about to make sure that the learning experiences are personalized for students. Flexibility of access is another asset of blended learning. Teachers can create their own content, which allows them to filter out unnecessary information or use some of the other tools like eLearning VA or Virtual Virginia, WHRO, and they literally have access to tons of resources at the click of a button. Preparation for online exams. So blended learning prepares students for a future of online exams. And these online assessments are not only needed for graduation, but think about the workforce and how many jobs require students to have that digital knowledge. Optimizing instructional time. When teachers look at the data and analyze the individual needs of their students or their classes, instructional time is spent with the most meaningful opportunities. And that thus increases teacher efficacy. If they're spending the time on stuff that's beneficial for the students, the teacher's sense of efficacy increases. So one of the biggest challenges to blended learning, I would say, is lack of technology. We're fortunate in my district because the students they all have devices. They moved on one-on-one after the pandemic. And in addition, those without internet access were given mobile hotspots so that they could access the internet at home. This could be a challenge in districts that don't have these resources. If you want to implement a flipped learning classroom, but only half of your students have devices and only 75% of them have internet at home, you can't expect them to watch these videos and engage in that content at home. So lack of technology seems to be one of the biggest challenges for blended learning. Waste of resources. This can either be on the student end or the teacher end. A teacher may not be trained in effective use of the resources that are available, or may not even know what resources are available out there. So professional development can definitely combat that and help the teachers to be knowledgeable of what resources to use and when to use them. Accountability is another challenge. Students may not always use their time wisely. For instance, if they don't watch their flipped classroom video at home, when they come into class, they're already behind. What are you as a teacher going to do if over half of your class didn't watch the video at home? There's no way that you can proceed with the activities if they didn't complete their assignments. So thinking about ways to hold the kids accountable for their learning is a challenge of blended learning. And finally, plagiarism. This is a big disadvantage with websites. We've got Google and Wikipedia. Students are able to just search their answers on the web, copy and paste them, and really not use the resources that are out there appropriately. So to combat this, I think digital citizenship must be taught so students can learn how to responsibly navigate the World Wide Web. So here's some resources that I found particularly helpful for blended learning. Edgenuity has resources, and all of these are hyperlinked. And then blended learning models, all those models that I showed to you earlier, this website here, or this link here, goes into a little bit more detail on all of those models. So you have access to those. So just some final thoughts, some key takeaways. Quality over quantity. I've presented you guys with dozens of resources, some that you may have heard of already, some that you may not have been familiar with. But the goal isn't to see how many apps or websites you can throw at your students. Rather, you must see how you can use what's appropriate for the students to really optimize instruction and optimize their learning. Plan B, we all know how reliable technology is. Have a plan, have a backup plan in mind. You know how it gets when you get ready to do a lesson, you plan this lesson, you even invite your administrator in to do an observation that day, and then you get to the school and the internet is out in just your classroom. So have a plan, a backup plan in mind, whether that be downloading your resources or making some things available offline. Just keep that in mind that technology is not 100% reliable. And finally, clear expectations. One of my favorite quotes is begin with the end in mind. When students know what's expected of them and you clearly express those expectations to your students, I think you just put them in a position to succeed. So that's all I have. The QR code here links to a copy of the presentation. If you're unable to scan the code, there is the bit.ly. And all of these resources have also been uploaded to we were debating the pronunciation earlier, SCED, to the SCED online app. So you have access to all of those.
So we had one question come in the chat while you were talking.
Okay.
Someone asked, in a flipped classroom, what is a reasonable amount of time that students should spend on homework? And then the attendee specified specifically due to the issues of equity.
So homework as in things that they're assigning at home or the homework that they're completing in class? I would say just
like that, and if the attendee wants to clarify.
Yeah, so I think it basically depends on what grade your students are in. Obviously, an elementary student, sixth grader, is not able to retain as much information as a senior in high school. So it would definitely depend on the grade level and maturity level of your students. And also in class, how much time would you spend giving an assignment or teaching on an assignment? Our attention spans aren't that long, aren't that great. So I would say anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes, nothing longer. You don't want an hour-long presentation for your students to go through while they're at home. Keeping in mind that your class is not the only class that they have. I know that a lot of schools and divisions have guidelines about how much time each grade level should spend doing homework. So there are a lot of variables involved in that, but I would just say definitely just having the knowledge of the age group you're working with will help to decide how much time.
While you were speaking, another question came in. Do you have any classroom management tips for middle school teachers afraid of the station rotation model who have limited extra adults in their classroom, whether they're paraprofessionals, inclusion teachers, or otherwise?
Like I said, establishing those clear expectations for students and having consequences for negative behavior. And it's not always focusing on the negative behavior. Those students who are always doing right, you got to make an example out of them. You got to reward those students in the presence of others. So by rewarding positive behavior and punishing the negative behavior, I think it will send a clear symbol to the students of what your expectations are. Yes, ma'am.
In your experience, have you ever had students who were not allowed to have technology at home? Like the flipped classroom, I can think of a few students.
So I haven't even considered that, but that would definitely be a challenge. So I'm not sure in that instance if a flip model would be appropriate for that student. I'm sure you can take the digital content and try to condense it to some sort of paper form, but I guess that would require a little bit more planning, but I've never come across that. But that's something to consider.
You could have an extra, I was thinking of this because you know, and I know exactly about those half of the kids that don't watch the video at home. That could be an additional station, or, you know, that's, if you didn't do the homework and for that particular student, not as punishment for them, but you need to watch my instructional video, and then that would limit them to the other options. You know, they would need to do the teacher led and then the practice. But maybe the online component where they did IXL or whatever, they would maybe miss that station because they would, and then your video, and make sure the kids at least saw the instruction, were able to work with you, and then do the practice with the manipulatives. That might be.
I love that idea.
They lose a little bit of their voice and
Yes.
choice.
Yeah,
Right.
but just hone in on those, like that would be individualized rotation where, okay, so I know that the student can't go through all the stations, but maybe I definitely want them getting that direct instruction from me and that collaborative learning, but definitely make sure that they do that online learning station in class. Great idea. Okay. So if we have no other questions, I want to thank you all for being such great attendees, and safe travels for you all as you head back home, and take care.